I avast! Matey! To war! Jimmy, turn this boat around! Time to face our enemy! What the? Damn it! Timmy! Damn it, Timmy, get us out of here! Wait! We've got a situation here. We'll be with you in a second. Push, Timmy, push! Hey! Stop it! Don't do it! No! I can see you moving! You will wait until... Hey! No!
Damn it! Now, I don't think I'm a naturally stupid human being, but when I get stuck on the one tiny piece of land in an area where there is a massive open body of water to the right of me, it makes a man wonder. Alright guys, stop right there. You're probably already like, yuck, get me out of here, this game looks like cow poo. I get it, I did too. But stick with me for a bit, because I want to tell you guys about a game that, on the surface, looks like a hard pass, but is actually a diamond in the rough. The rough being the graphics, which are quite rough. This MMORPG is called Uncharted Waters Online. It released on Steam in December of 2018, but its actual release was all the way back in 2004. Don't dwell on that though. And as far as unique MMOs go, this game is close to the top of the list. What I've experienced over my 25 hours playing Uncharted Waters is a plethora of interesting gameplay features, confusion caused by all of them, and an overwhelming desire to break free of my newbie origins and become a competent swashbuckler who finds his path in this virtual life. Now, why this is already a strong start for an MMO is, how many games from the same genre have you played where you start out and you're in the noob stages and you're wondering if you should keep playing? Because so far, it feels like you've been here before, the gameplay feels the same, the mechanics and enemies feel the same, and so on. A lot of MMOs give this vibe, but Uncharted Waters feels different from the beginning, for better or worse. But regardless, I was curious to see where the game led because of this uniqueness, and I'm happy I did, because continuing to play is what allows me to make a video to tell others it's worth getting past the start of this game, where the outdatedness of the game is palpable immediately. And on that note, I'm gonna jump into some pros, cons, and finally neutrals to give you guys a clear glimpse of what this special MMO offers. Before we start, just a reminder that the following is just my opinion. I am by no means saying that I am an expert on the game, as I have amassed 25 hours and have only gotten a taste of the entire experience. I always try to recommend you try the game yourself. The Notebook, one of the greatest movies of all time, 53 Metacritic score, one of the greatest crimes of the modern world. Good thing I didn't listen to these quack reviewers, because look at what I scored it! 10 bangaroonies to match the amount of times I cried during this movie in one sitting. What I'm saying is you need to experience it yourself. Trust no one! Alright, the first pro. There is just a crazy amount to do in this game. The best way to describe Uncharted Waters is like EVE-lite, but with pirates and the open seas instead of spaceships in space, and with more of a spotlight on activities that aren't PvP related. So when you think of EVE, you think of a massive universe and a crazy level of freedom. The experience isn't on rails at all. You're doing whatever you want, literally creating your own unique life from every other player. And this is the same as Uncharted Waters Online. There are so many different options to choose from, and like EVE, you can choose how you want to spend your days as a swashbuckler, whether it be terrorizing other players, and being a pirate, being a trader, and sailing long distances to new countries to find the best prices, because it's a lot like real life where certain countries are the chief exporters of certain goods and also require certain goods more than other places, so they pay a higher price than those other places. Supply and demand, guys. It plays a part here. You can be an explorer and uncover any of the 3,000 plus discoveries available in this game, or you can be a mercenary, and so on. I call Uncharted Waters EVE-lite because it doesn't have as much of an emphasis on player versus player fights, as it feels like there's so much to do outside of that as well, which, as much as I love EVE, it's nice to not always feel that pressure of, if I'm not competent in PvP, this can get really rough. The next pro, there's an insane level of depth. The amount of detail in this game, the jobs the devs have done to include every possible scenario you can think of that a pirate may run into his lifetime or with his crew, is remarkable. I mean, this feels as close to simulating a pirate's life as you'll get. This game is Sid Meier's Pirates on crack, which is really saying something because Pirates has to be one of my favorite games of all time. I adore that game. But the difference between Pirates and UWO is Uncharted Waters obviously is an MMO, and Pirates is a 12-hour-long campaign kind of game. So Pirates more consistently delivers thrills and fun, but Uncharted Waters, if you're okay with slow to moderate pacing, this game vastly overtakes the level of detail that Pirates had. Uncharted Waters literally has accounted for everything you can imagine as a pirate to the point where I don't know where to start explaining the level of detail. But this wouldn't mean anything if they aren't incorporated in a fun way, and for the most part they have been. I'll just explain some of the little features this game has out of the hundreds that add to your experience of feeling like an actual 15th century civilian. The female guy, or, you know, either or, you know? Number 1, okay, treasure hunting. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna try to explain it. No, I'm not. There's too much to explain it. There is so much to it, I don't even want to talk about it. Get the camera away from me. Okay, putting it simply, I go to a barkeep. I want rum. You gonna give me rum? Sure, I'll give you rum, but let me tell you about treasure hunting so you can afford the rum. And stop using your overdraft protection to pay for it, you shitty pirate. Alright, tell me whatever you want about it. Okay, so basically when a mommy and daddy, you might get your next clue this way, or you might get it another way, who's to say? Once you get the clues, it's like a puzzle that you need to piece together to form one piece. Copyright infringement not intended. Point number 2, hundreds of different issues can arise from going to sea. For instance, your crew can develop problems like sickness, they may become agitated, and their loyalty towards you is wavering, and they may form a mutiny, resulting in a handful of crewmates being killed because your ride and die crew fight them off. Your ship can get caught on reefs or algae and damage the boat. Rats can infest your boat and eat your food and erode your equipment. Sailors can get scurvy and start dying off. So many random things can happen that literally make you feel like you're adapting to the nature of a pirate lifestyle all the time. A great example is I went out and did battle with a bunch of ships for hours as part of a quest for a town called Sagres, I think it's pronounced, and I'm heading back with a bunch of gold in my pocket, but my sailors are unhappy. Maybe one of them found out I slept with his wife, because in a role-playing state I kind of imagine my character as a bad boy, but a good guy. A respectful individual, but sometimes my promiscuity gets the best of me. Anyways, a mutiny breaks out, I start losing crew members, and then of course this happens, a fleet of Egyptian dudes jumps me, so I've literally got a mutiny going on my ship where my own guys are killing each other, and then these assholes pop up. And the best part is the mutiny doesn't pause for the fight. Nah, they keep mutinying on the ship as it's getting blown to hell. As you can imagine, I didn't win this fight. Next point, the history and the replication of the real world that comprises the world of UWO. This game tries to recreate a 15th century world for players and present them with the same opportunities that a real person in that era would be attracted to. Now, the game kind of offers 3 ways to level, which are in battle, adventure, and trade. So the obvious options based on these would be swashbuckler, explorer, or merchant. But much like EVE, while there are obvious paths you can pursue, the complete freedom UWO gives means you can do so much more. For instance, a feller in hostile waters held me up and told me to transfer him money or I'm getting sunk. Now, if you ask me, this was a polite feller because I'd get sunk by him in 3 seconds. He knew it, I knew it, this guy knew it, and he knows nothing. So paying him half my money wasn't the worst thing ever. You could be a guy who makes his living off of towing ships because your ship is really fast so he can move theirs faster. Cha-ching, money in the bank, know what I'm saying? And so on, there's just an endless amount to do. Next point, trading and hot commodities. I already kind of covered how this works in my first point, but to briefly add on to that, to trade in some places you need to learn their language for them to talk to you, and for you to be a successful merchant on a more global scale. Do you understand what I'm saying? What? Do you understand what I'm saying? What? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah, man, what's up? Some ports don't seem that willing to let foreigners onto their shores, so you might need to be wearing certain disguises to sneak into the town. Moving right along, the constantly changing world makes it feel like the players aren't the hero or the driving force of the path the world is taking. Uncharted Waters constantly reminds you that you are a tiny part of this living world that is constantly changing and evolving as it would in real life. You're a minuscule part of this grand scale of a world, one that does its best to simulate the stories and situations that may have actually happened during the 15th century. You get notifications like X city or country is undergoing a renaissance. There are these events called epic sea feuds, which keeps the conflict of nations at the forefront by having players fight under their flag based on a changing political landscape. There are just constantly moving pieces around the world that make you feel like you'll have a small part to play somewhere, but at the end of the day, the world's story will keep getting written with or without you. And the last point here is tons of different fittings and tactics for your ship. Like, again, referencing EVE, but you know how certain ship fittings work great against certain ships and others don't? It's the same here, and there is so much to consider, whether it be what skills you want to focus on acquiring and leveling, or what ship you want to use, and what fittings and equipment to bring based on the situations you think you will encounter. Or even preparing for what you don't think you'll encounter, but you just need to play it a bit safe. My next pro, sorry that last one was really long, the community has been amazing so far. If they're not helping me with a quest, they're explaining to me why my name got banned. Rookie mistake, guys, if you have a questionable name, never talk in world chat. Anyways, I felt my name was pretty creative and tasteful, and you could argue it was artsy, but I guess some younger kids may play this game. Yeah, they can listen to Ariana Grande talking about sexy time all day on the radio, but my name gets banned. Sometimes, guys. So I saw this review on Steam, and this guy says he's played this game for over 6 years, and he proceeds to say that the community is bad because they're cliquey. Now, I'm not going to question his experience, but I want to say I have literally not had anyone bother me after asking all my questions. I have had plenty of people personally PM me when I asked a question in world chat so they could help me, and I've always gotten helpful responses. Next pro, there's a surprisingly interesting narrative. There's a royal chick that you save, and then she's like, oh, my hero, even though you didn't actually save her, a guard came along. The truth is, your ass was about to get beat by the guys harassing her as well, but for some reason, this guard that actually saved the day doesn't get any fucking credit. Your character gets all of it, and this guy's still probably working 12-hour night shifts in the street. Life's a bitch. Next pro, I like the fact that there's a lot of risk that things can go wrong in this game. Every time I'm about to undock, man, I'm so paranoid, I'm like, okay, my sailors are probably gonna mutiny on me again because, let's be real guys, I'm a pretty shitty captain. Thank gosh the game isn't realistic to the point where sailors won't join up based on how shitty your stats are, because if that were the case, I'd have to start a new character. No one would board this Deathmobile, okay? We're into the cons, guys. The deep shit, the real shit. First con, the graphics are like straight from a PlayStation 2 game, even on max settings. To be fair, this game released like 15 years ago, but it definitely does not hold up well visually, even when comparing it to other very old MMOs. I've mentioned this a lot for other older games, and that is that their graphics look old but still have a charm to them, which makes them still nice to look at, despite not being at all AAA graphics. Uncharted Waters is an exception to this, with not just the graphics being of lower quality, but there hasn't been much of an effort to even give the map some life, some soul. 90% of the land you see is completely empty. It's just rocky, plain looking land. Even adding some buildings here and there outside of the ports that you can just look at if not reach would have added some intrigue to the game world. But instead, it's a sea which has repeating tileable textures, land that is as dull looking as it gets, the ports look all near identical, and drop a coat of flat texturing over top all of these models to really drag down the visual fidelity. And I don't usually care to make this much of a point about the graphics, but the reality is there is a lot of downtime while sailing the seas where there's nothing around and nothing going on. All there is to do is sail towards an objective or a port, so at the very least it would have been nice to look around and have the map evoke some wonder to the player. Next con, there is tons of reading, and I'm not talking about fun reading like 50 Shades of Grey, I'm talking like tutorials on top of tutorials. Now, fair enough, there is a lot to this game, so there's a lot to teach, and it's an older MMO, so we can't get too angry about it, but the way they've implemented tutorials is pretty intrusive to gameplay. What I mean is, you'll just be doing your thing, something you've done 10 times over, like boarding your ship from the harbor or porting in a town, and then, without your consent, a dialogue box will pop up randomly and make you click through a bunch of dialogue which is serving as a tutorial about some random feature of the game that you aren't even really using right now. It can get annoying, and it would be great if it was just an icon that popped up saying, hey, there's a tutorial you can watch about this feature. You want to go through with it? The result of these tutorial intrusions is you just want to skip everything because it so randomly cuts off your gameplay momentum. You're just thinking like, oh man, I don't want to read about this right now, I'm not even doing this. Also, actual story-wise, the dialogue with characters is not recorded, there's no voices, which isn't a con, but it's good to just be wary of the fact that you'll be reading through all of the tutorials, all of the dialogue, and so on. Next up, quest descriptions aren't very clear. What makes this a bigger issue is there are no map markers like in most MMOs. Like, if you receive a quest, it doesn't show you at all where to go. You just have to read the dialogue, and that's all you get to go off of. And the map isn't the greatest, so there are plenty of times where finding the objective has practically come down to just guessing where to go. Over time, I'm sure I'll learn these areas a lot better, but like this description, as a new player I read that and I'm like, what the fudge does that mean? And then I go harass those nice players in world chat. I'm probably the sole reason they won't be welcoming to any of you new guys, so I apologize. Now this issue has a good side. It promotes exploration. I mean, I kind of like the idea of, oh, I'm an up-and-coming pirate and just exploring and learning about my world. But the downside comes from the point I made about the graphics. The world is huge, but it all looks samey and super plain. So sometimes you get tired of seeing the exact same brown blobs of land and want to just get to the objective, do it, and cash it in. And these descriptions make it hard to do. This point is more to let you guys know that if you're looking to jump into this game and expect fast progression and quickly blazing through quests, probably not gonna happen, not at first. And this point is part of a larger point which might deter some players, and that is the complete lack of handholding. It's really hard to get into this game. For the first dozen hours, you'll probably feel super lost and confused as to what you should really be doing, and what you will probably end up doing is running fairly repetitive quests for your respective guilds. What the game hasn't shown you is how much there is to it. There are so many things to do, and the lack of guidance first feels like a bit of a curse, because you don't ever know if you're logging in and making the best of your playtime. But of course, as you make it further into the game, it becomes a blessing, having this much freedom to literally pursue any path that you've taken a liking to. The point though is that as a new player, the game will feel daunting to the point where you're wondering if you should keep going. My recommendation here is don't quit, just play the game at your own pace, and don't expect to kick ass with progression for the first 20 or so hours. Like I said, it's a lot like EVE, where you kind of play it knowing the start is slow, but the payoff, which is essentially an endless amount of possibilities, is worth it. Next con, we're almost done. Now this just might be a me thing, veteran players, please sound off in the comments if I'm not controlling my boat well, but handling of my ship can feel delayed and inconsistent, and I've had some frustrating moments where I'll be commanding my ship to go one way, but it's like my ship has a mind of its own and it starts panicking, like it's become self-aware, like the yogurt in Love, Death, and Robots on Netflix, which you should totally watch, and it's really annoying. Stop it, stupid boat, I run this shit. Now, I don't know if I'm just doing something wrong, maybe it's my newbiness that's leading this boat left even though I'm clearly clicking for it to go right. But I swear, sometimes my boat will start like going the wrong way or its response will just be delayed. Like I'll try to turn it and then there's this 1 second pause where it doesn't do anything and then all of a sudden it kind of jolts to the direction I told it to go. Now I haven't tried PvP yet, but I feel like this would be the most hair-pulling thing ever if you're trying not to die and your ship is just taking its time listening to you or going the wrong way. Con number 5 de mayo. I don't know. At its core, Uncharted Waters is pretty grindy. If you want to become really proficient in one thing, it seems like there is a lot of grinding involved in getting there. This is a norm for most MMOs, and to its credit, I didn't actually start feeling like I was grinding in this game until about past the 20-hour mark, because I was so busy trying to learn the game and options I can pursue. But now that I've figured that out a bit, I've kind of been grinding away my combat training so I can eventually get to a point where I can fight in harder areas and have better skills. So this has just involved grinding fights both at sea and land fights, and it's going pretty slowly, like, a little bit worried about how much worse the grind will get. The last con, even the larger cities feel barren, and this is a problem mostly caused by a lack of players. This isn't entirely true in all areas of the map, but kind of like the state of Guild Wars 1 right now, there are plenty of ports you will visit with no players to be seen. But the main hubs, like the main trading areas, will have a good amount of players. Luckily, I regularly see players exploring the vast seas, but in terms of the ports, there have been next to no players running about, which, unless you're chilling at the hubs, can give that feeling of emptiness. On the flip side though, the players that have stuck around are dedicated as hell. And these guys are generally very active in the world chat around the clock. And now we're in the neutrals, and this happens to be a great segue. The lack of new players and the dedication of old players is the first neutral. From the players I've talked to, they've rarely seen new people start playing this game. The result is a lot of experienced players who have been playing a long time and have a wealth of knowledge to share, which is great. But the downside is if you want to be competitive in something like PvP, you are facing seasoned players, and it's going to take a lot of time to get to the point where you can actually fight them and survive. The next neutral is the unforgiving gameplay if you aren't smart. It's not like most MMOs where you die and just respawn and you're good to go. It's a lot like EVE, where you not only lose a handful of items, but a huge portion of however much money you're carrying around, regardless of if you die to a real player or NPC. This is, I guess you could say, not a Care Bear game. And to give you an example, after you reach a total level of 20, you've left what the game would consider consider the noob stage. And my dumbass saw the text telling me about this fact, and you know when you've read something and you don't really absorb it? Yeah, my college grades know all about that. Anyway, so I didn't absorb this fact, and just before I hit level 20, a helpful player supplied me with 2 million bucks. So I blew past level 20, and guess what happened? I started getting more difficult quests, and the game became harder. I started dying, a lot. I went from 2 million bucks to less than 25,000 in the span of 4 hours. Pay attention to this tiny little chat box, it'll save your life! The last neutral. Something I can't comment on is if this game is pay to win. What I have consistently read is that it's not pay to win unless you eventually get far enough that you want to get into competitive PvP. What I will say is, by the time you can start even thinking about competitive in this game, you'll have sunk dozens upon dozens of hours into Uncharted Waters. I've played 25 hours and I'm not even close to fighting a mediocre player for get competitive PvP. So what I'm trying to say is, by the time you get there, you'll have spent a long time playing Uncharted Waters. So at that point, I think it makes sense to spend some money on a game if you've already spent tons of hours playing it, and it's all been free so far and you're having fun. I always like the idea of supporting developers if they put out a game that I've had fun playing. So if you've got 50 plus hours out of this game for free and have had fun, it's not the worst thing to drop some cash on the game to bump you into that hardcore PvP stage. And we're at the final verdict. Uncharted Waters Online embodies the saying old but gold. It's been both a beautiful thing and a tragedy that to find innovation in MMORPGs nowadays, we have to rewind way back to the MMOs of over a decade old. But luckily, Uncharted Waters Online has not only held up well gameplay-wise, considering it's been out for 15 years, but it is packed with some of the most in-depth and expansive content I've played in a game of this genre. The biggest hurdle every player will have to make, though, is the aging of the game's presentation, both in the UI, which feels slow and clunky compared to modern-day games, and the graphics, which aren't nice to look at and really do hide the game's beauty under a coating of low-res textures and flat lighting. However, despite this, I actually got immersed in Uncharted Waters Online. I felt like I was living the life of a seafarer from the 15th century. I felt like I was doing it my way, creating my own story. And it's a beautiful thing when a world can look like this and still give you that feeling. I have rarely gotten immersed in a game where the world didn't have at least decent or charming graphics, because I felt like I needed to be in a somewhat intriguing world for that to happen. But UWO proved that wrong. Yes, the progression is slow, and no, the gameplay isn't incredibly exciting a lot of the time, but that is substituted with a paced progression that makes you feel like you are slowly rising to a more prominent and capable being, and honestly, the pacing of the game is appropriate, considering there's a lot to take in before you really go your own way and establish your path. I would at least recommend you give Uncharted Waters a shot. It's a definitely bad start, but when it hits its stride, it is a pretty golden experience. Alright guys, a long video, but I wanted to say quite a bit because this game really doesn't have any popularity anymore, and I wanted to do this right. So consider subscribing if I didn't bore you to death. I focus on MMO and RPG content. Leave a comment, I love hearing from you guys. Honestly, the best part of uploading is interacting with you guys. And as the cool YouTubers say, smash that like button. Alright, take care.